Move on once again. China has praised its relationship with Russia as strategically valuable during Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's visit to Beijing. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized that the Russia-China partnership stands at the most stable, mature and strategically important relationship between major global powers today. The two ministers discussed a range of pressing global issues. Both sides expressed their commitment to deepening comprehensive strategic cooperation and addressing the challenges. Meanwhile, Russia and China engaged in talks surrounding the war in Ukraine and their respective relations with the United States. Lavrov's visit to Beijing also served as an opportunity to explore the prospects for resolving the war in Ukraine, as well as strategies for strengthening their positions in global forums such as the United Nations, the SCO, BRICS and the G20. Both countries reaffirmed their commitment to close coordination and collaboration on the international stage. While China claims neutrality on the Ukraine conflict, it has never condemned Russia's invasion, instead calling for an end to the fighting. Now we're once again joined by Spencer Critchley to discuss this further. Spencer, I've got a couple of questions for you here. How credible is this claim from Beijing of neutrality in Ukraine's war when Beijing continues its praise for its, quote, strategic ties with Moscow? And then second of all, what does China gain from this relationship with Moscow and calling it the most stable and strategically valuable among major powers?
I don't think it carries a great deal of credibility. The foreign minister of China reportedly met with the director of foreign affairs for the European Union in May, I believe it was. And according to a source present at the meeting, admitted basically that China has an interest in the Ukraine war continuing and would not want to see it end anytime soon, because China sees it as distracting the attention of the United States from China. And so China, if this is to be believed, and I think it's easy to believe it, would see the Ukraine war, the deaths of all of these civilians as well as soldiers, as a convenient foil simply to tie up the United States in its competition with China. It's incredibly cynical. Unfortunately, we see that sort of behavior in international affairs all too often. I also think it's incredibly short-sighted, and for China to claim to see Russia as perhaps its most valued strategic partner is hard to believe for another reason. China just has the most enormous potential and is definitely the senior partner in that relationship, and Russia is a failing state, beset by corruption and the incompetence that comes with dictatorial rule so predictably. When you suppress all freedom of speech and freedom of dissent, you create a culture of incompetence, and of course you encourage corruption when you run a dictatorship as essentially a crony capitalist kleptocracy. And so all of that is leading Russia to suffer enormous military losses in its war with Ukraine and suffer terrible damage to its economy. Its economy has been struggling for many years in any case. Russia is often described as a gas station with an economy because it creates so few products that other countries want to buy. It just pumps oil and sells oil. Meanwhile, China has achieved amazing progress, and yet, in my opinion, is squandering so much of its potential by going down this route of backing away from its initial liberalization after the death of Mao, and especially under Xi, becoming ever more authoritarian and risking suffering the same kind of fate that Russia has been suffering, which is the fate of authoritarian regimes in general. And as I say, even from the pure self-interest of China, given the incredible potential it has, the incredible talents of its people, the resources it has to command, the achievements it's made in educating its enormous population and industrializing after having to overcome all the handicaps imposed on it under Mao. You know, it's just got incredible potential and was beginning to realize that potential, and I think it's squandering it, frankly.
Spencer, what are your thoughts on China, the way it gets involved in foreign affairs? We've heard that that it preaches impartiality in this Ukraine conflict. However, it pushes for an end to the fighting. Do you think there's any real sign that China would ever push towards a negotiated settlement in Ukraine, or is that just diplomatic rhetoric? And I just want to get your thoughts on how China is moving here in regards to brokering deals, brokering peace deals, etc., etc.
Again, I think it's easy to believe that China sees it as it's more in its interest to prolong the Ukraine war, which, as I say, I think is just deeply, deeply cynical and irresponsible. If they were serious about achieving peace in Ukraine, they would not be providing so much support to Russia, not just moral support, but significant material support, reportedly including weapons. It really does seem very difficult to trust what Beijing is saying in this regard. And as I was saying earlier, it is not a matter where you can just say, well, these are the sorts of practical, realistic calculations that nations need to make sometimes, where they need to bend on their own principles in order to serve a larger objective they see as more valuable. This is really choosing to ally with a completely corrupt pariah state that's doing enormous damage to its neighbors and has been for a long time, and that poses a threat to the future of civilization as most people understand that word. And it's a reversion to barbarism, to essentially feudal times where only power matters. And you know, the torture and murder of civilians is just considered a normal part of doing business. And I think for China to ally itself with that and think that there's a future in that sort of behavior is not only obviously wrong, but short-sighted, unless China is counting on the devolution of the entire world into that kind of, you know, Hobbesian nightmare of raw power and aggression.
Yes, Spencer Critchley, thank you very much for your joining us